to show you how to palmer a jig. This one's going to be for steelhead. It's going to be a nightmare variation using a few things. Whenever I palmer jigs, I always put a bump of something, some sort of dubbing underneath it. I don't know what thread I'm using, but whatever you use at least a 6/0. I have a tendency to break. This is black ice dub, obviously. When you're making these little dubbing noodles, you always want to spin your thread in the same direction every time. And what this is going to do is going to keep the feathers from collapsing and just sticking to the shank. So once you get it going, continue to twist. I'm just trying to build up a bump. So the whole point is just to get a glob. Once I get that, put the thread right in front of it. Now we're going to tie in some marabou. I use the Pro's Choice. Fisherman's carries it. I'm going to tie it in by the tip. When you tie in marabou by the tip, you got to be pretty gentle, because if not, as soon as you torque down on your thread, you're going to break the quill. Do a nice loose wrap, a couple loose ones, get a little snugger. Secure it down, 3 or 4 wraps, break the tip out. When you're palmering marabou, you want to leave room in between each wrap, because if you just clump it up and stack it as much on there as you can, you're just going to end up with a big old wad of feathers. So as I go around the hook shank, I'm going to pull everything toward the rear. That's one. I'll probably end up at 2 or 3 wraps. It all just depends on how full the feather was, or how hefty of a jig I'm going for. We're going to do one more. Alright, get in there and capture that. Let that go. Clip that out of there. Get any of the fibers that are stuck unstuck. Stroke it all to the rear. Now here's the important thing with palmering, is that when you palmer this marabou, it's just like a standard jig. I should have had one out, but the tail is about the length of the straight part of the hook here. It still is. Once this gets wet, it's going to sleek down to not a lot of material, and it's roughly the same length. It's a little longer than the hook shank, but right around there is about, as long as I'm touching my vise, that's my gauge anyways. So we're going to secure that down, get a little more thread down. Alright, tie in some schlappen. You know, use whatever you like. You can use Chinese saddle hackle, but the fibers are just shorter. And we're going to tie this in by the tip. I usually will cut and leave a little triangle and use that to bite in for the thread to really grab a hold of it. Loose wrap, a little tighter. Secure it down. If I don't get all that triangle, that's alright, just snip it out. If you're worried about it pulling out, give it a little tug, see if you got it in there good. And when you're palmering, I highly recommend you use any sort of hackle plier. So that way when I'm wrapping around, if I let go or if I lose it, I don't lose everything that I've done. And all these, I have my fibers facing the rear. The natural curve of the feather. Don't want to whack the camera. Well, this one's, same thing as the marabou, just wrapping one wrap in front of the other, giving it a little room to breathe. Oopsies. I'll do, just depends on how heavily you want to dress your jig. That looks good. I think that's 4, maybe 5 turns. Once I capture that, snip out the excess, grab it all back, and you'll see the quill where you just cut. You just want to make sure you got that good and trapped. Good. The last thing I do with all my jigs is I add flash. Not a lot. I've been messing with this Cascade Crest Tools. It's crinkle mirror flash. This one's blue. It'll contrast with the red and the black. And this stuff is just moves well in the water. Reflects a lot of light, not too much, so you don't want to tie in more than a couple strands. For me, 2 is plenty of flash. It's got a nice, almost a chartreuse type of gleam to it, but I just tie it down. I want it to get to where I want to ride most of the time. I just have a couple going down each side. Tie that down. Make it about as long as the tail. Same thing on the other side. If you have trouble getting to where you want, tie in where you want, you leave the wraps kind of loose. You can, that's why I have a little bit sticking out of the front. You can adjust it, get it right where you want, pull down nice and tight. And now my ends are blended in, and we'll cut them out in a second. Same thing. Go back here, just past the tail. I'll stroke everything to the rear. I clip off these tags on the flash. I can find them. Okay. I'm going to pull everything back. Build up a nice little collar. There we go. Nice even collar. And for the whole whip finish, people say, 3, 4, 5 turns for these things. I'll do 3. Cinch that down. I'll do another 1, 2, 3. Cinch that down. And then I'll do one last one just to make sure. Kevlar thread is also a really good option. I used to use Big Fly thread by Uni Thread, and then I found Kevlar. Kevlar's just stout, you don't break it very often. I tie flies as well, so I have all sorts of thread. But then, I don't like stuff to be the same length. So right now my flash is identically the same length, so I'll reach in here and snip them, probably a 1/2 inch difference. That way they're staggered, they don't stick. If nothing's the same length here, it's not all going to clump up, it's all going to open up and breathe on its own. And then we'll throw some head cement. Use water soluble head cement. I'm just wetting everything down with some water to get it out of my way. Find out where that finish is. You only need a drop or two. You can also use super glue. That works. Depends on what I'm doing for steelhead jigs. It depends. I usually use the head cement for this stuff. Loon, or you can use the Sally Henson's Hard as Nails. This stuff works really well too. But yeah, there you go. That's how I palmer my jigs. A lot of material, but it's got really good movement in the water, and the steelhead seem to like it, so as long as they keep eating it, I'll keep tying it. Alright, I hope you learned something.